So, hi guys, welcome to today's stream. My name is Anthony Gakio Wanjohi. I'm part of the core team at Angular Kenya. I'm an Angular developer, a software engineer, a student, and today we are privileged to have Babatunde. Babatunde is a Google developer expert for Angular. He's from Nigeria, and I don't think I'll take the stage for I'll take his stage for much longer. I'll just let him introduce himself and we'll see what he has in store for us today. So Babatunde, you can take it away.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay, let's just get started. So today we're looking at accessibility, right? And basically, we want to look at the modern Angular accessibility practices. Okay. A little bit about myself. My name is Babatunde, and I'm an Angular GDE, a good developer expert, and I'm also a senior front-end engineer working with Flutterwave. I'm also a mentor for the Google Startup Program. Okay. So what is web accessibility? When we talk about web accessibility, we are referring to, the ability to use an application. All right. The accessibility there simply means that is this application accessible to everyone? Does it mean that everyone, regardless of, the ability to function, interact with objects, they have the ability to access your web application, right? And you see this more in maybe developed environments where there is a ramp or there is a place for it is a parking spot for disabled individuals. They have their own set of things that makes it easy for them to interact with the world. Fortunately, in my part of the world, you don't really see that, right? Hopefully, we get there. Well, that's the goal. Accessibility. So, as a software engineer, it is important that when we build applications, we don't just build applications based on our own abilities, right? We should be able to build applications so that someone that is blind or low vision can use the screen reader to hear the page. you know Someone that has motor impairment should be able to also navigate your application. Someone with color blindness should also be able to interact with your application easily. And so somebody also with some cognitive issues should be able to access the application. The application is simple and clear, enough for the individual to, interact with it. So we look at all of these components, the vision, the motor skills, the color blindness, the cognitive aspect of all of these components. And with that in mind, we build our application as a software engineer. So it now becomes like a responsibility to build for everyone, and not just to build for, people with your kind of abilities. So one question people ask is, why does it matter? If you look at the stats here on the screen, 1 in 6 people worldwide live with some form of disability. All right. 96% of the top 1 million websites have detectable accessibility failures. And you also look at the fact that 71% of disabled users leave a website that is hard to use. Maybe because like of the things we previously mentioned, they find it the contrast is just too much, for them to be able to interact with the application. um you know Based on their motor skills and all of that, they can't interact with your application, so it becomes a drag, it becomes an issue. So accessibility isn't a checkbox, it's how you decide who gets to use what you build. So in Nigeria and across Africa, mobile first users with assistive tech are a growing audience. There was a um, video I saw of a very popular musician, he's actually blind in Nigeria, and I saw the way he was using the phone to interact, to tweet. His name is Cobams, actually. Using the phone to tweet. I was like, wow, this is actually nice. You know, that a blind person can use the phone to tweet and to do some other things. That is accessibility you're talking about. So, when we think of ARIA, we think of area like, subtitles on a video. Subtitles are great, but the real fix is making the audio clear in the first place. So if the audio is clear, there wouldn't be any need for subtitles. When I watch anime, for example, I, turn on the subtitles because I can't, hear what's going on. All right. I can't hear, I know a little bit of Japanese, but not, at full length. But the subtitles are turned on for me to be able to, see what's going on. All right. Right. So there is a right way and a wrong way to look at it. The wrong way is, area patching. You use div to make a button. While we're growing up as learning to code and everything, using div was like the go-to. We just div everything. We div everything, and that's bad. As time went on, there was now what we call semantic HTML. All right. um, Basically elements that clearly describes its meaning, both to the browser and the developer. So you have, tags, as a front-end engineer or software engineer, you have tags that clearly define the meaning of the content that is being enclosed, right? So rather than use a div as an example to make a button, and then you add a row, you add tab, and all of those things, you can just use a button. All right, that's the right way to look at it. So that's what called semantic HTML. And there are also a couple of HTML tags that I'm not displaying on the screen at the moment. But as a front-end engineer or as a developer, when it comes to templating, these are the things that you should know off the scrap of your head, off the top of your head, right? You should know that um, typically you have your main tag, you have your body, and you have your footer, and everything is enclosed in the main tag, right? You would have your article, you have headers. This is an example of semantic HTML. And as an engineer, this should be your go-to. You should have that. You should have that in mind before building. Like your templating should be semantic enough. In fact, from the top to the bottom, it should be semantic. Each tag should define a purpose, and that purpose is clearly stated, in the tag itself. Right. We've talked about the general, aspect of, building software applications, not specifically tied to Angular, but as a front-end engineer working with React View or whatnot, right? We should use proper semantic tags. It's quite important. Now we are on to Angular. The purpose of this particular webinar or this session is to expose us to some of the tools that Angular has released, you know, over the years, over the months, and how you can integrate them into your application. But the truth is, if your application is still relying on old APIs or old Angular APIs or old Angular ways of doing things, then it's not accessible, right? I want you to have that mindset. It's not accessible. Accessibility also in this session, as I like to put it, is you being up to date with the latest APIs or the latest, features that Angular has released. All right. That in itself will, make your application robust, all right, and accessible. Okay. Oh, on this channel, on this Angular Kenya channel, we've several speakers have come. They've talked about signals and all of that. I'm not going to beat that, but you think of signal as a spreadsheet, and a cell that changes. You have A1 cell that changes, and every formula that reads A1 updates automatically. Just simply put, and there's no need to push the change manually. So accessibility again involves that you as a Angular engineer or a software engineer, you are building with the latest features. Think of the new features or the latest features as improvement on what was and what is. All right. And if you're not building with the latest tools or the latest plugin, latest APIs or latest features in Angular, what you're doing is you are depriving your users of that accessibility. You're depriving your users of that experience. All right. Have it in the background. So when there's a new change and it's stable, update and align your code with that particular new change so that you can involve your users with, involve them with the right experience. They can have the right experience. You can see here on the old way, the manual updates, you can see how, you know, how it is when you do a manual update and you see like signals reactive by default. You know, another accessibility feature that we want to look at is, Angular is the component primitive, is the host element. Every Angular component has a host element. I know that a couple of things are changing, obviously, the coming days or months, right? The custom tag that lives in the DOM, that's your very first accessibility hook. Now you see on this side, there's extra div wrapping, you know, here, and you see on the other side we have the host element as dialog correct. So this should be, the correct way, the accessible way to, build something like this, something like a dialog. What's the result of this? The result is that there's no extra div in the DOM, and the component is the dialog. The role, the attributes, and keyboard handler all live in one place. It's easy to find and it's easy to audit. All right. So remember we talked about, first of all, we talked about semantic HTML when it comes to your templating. We also talked about using the Signals API, and then we're talking about the host element, how to build correctly. Next thing is signal forms. Again, let me stress this fact. You have to build applications so that your users can experience the latest features. The latest features are not just there because Angular just feels like, we have to do something. We just need to create something because we want to build a momentum. No, it's so that what was can be improved upon so that our users and also the think of it like the developer experience and the user experience. All right. So we are making updates to this thing so that the developer can find it very easy to build more scalable applications, and the users can also find it easy to interact with applications that are being built using Angular. Okay. So basically is a screen challenge. Yeah. A screen reader, a screen reader user needs to hear validation errors, not just see them highlighted, in red. Okay. You can see here, when you do something like this, it interrupts the screen reader every time. And using this on your form field floors the user with announcement on every keystroke. Right. The best way to look at it is by, making your area life polite. So politely waits for the screen reader to finish and then reads the error. Much better experience, for keyboard users. Okay. And, you know, also using computed. Computed, let me check. Okay. All right. So computed with signals, error messages are computed automatically from form states, and the updates it updates only when the value changes. So look at this pattern here: signal driven form errors. Of course, this computed is derived from the signal. You cannot have computed without um, signal, right? So your computed is relying on the changes from the signal. We have this email error, and you can see right here, you know, when the error changes automatically, the user is updated. So remember, we've talked about semantic HTML, right? Using the right tags with the right meaning for the right purpose. Then we talked about signals, how leveraging signals can improve the user experience and also developer experience. We talked about primitives, we talked about hosts, how we can properly use you know the host element, and now we're looking at signal forms, all right? How we can build interactive and reactive signal form and ensure that people with low vision or people that are blind can access your form. Another feature I want to look at again is the new control flow for Angular. The new control flow, it basically just eradicates or eliminates the old ng if, ng for, and all of that, and makes it cleaner with at if and at for. I'll be honest with you. Initially when this announcement came out, sometimes ago, I had mixed feelings because I was used to ng4. That ng4 signifies, oh, this is Angular. I felt, oh, the team is moving away from everything Angular. This is what we love, ng and all of that. ng4, if, all those things, good stuff. But as I began to interact with the new control flow at if and at for, I began to see it more on the spectrum of you know making things better and easier, again, the things I mentioned before, for users, and also for the developer, right? So it's not about, oh, I'm stuck to this particular mindset of a thing, but I'm more about being progressive with the network, with the framework rather, and to just trust that these changes, you know, are there to make, number one, the developer experience nicer, and the user experience as well, nicer as well. So we have a problem. The problem is, you know, when the host is removed, focus, drops to body and the user is lost, you know. But we can fix that using the after next render function in the lifecycle. All right. You can see it moves focus after render. And you can see right here, we have our element in focus. All right. So it opens the panel and focus into it. Focuses into the panel in this case. And then when we close, returns focus. All right. And another problem that we see with stable tracking, and that's the challenge is the DOM is recreated on every update and the focus jumps. Right. We track, Angular reuses elements and the focus stays put. You can see this iterative function here. All right. So we are looking at the TX or transaction, and we are tracking it by the TX ID. Okay, and we're adding a little bit of area label over here. Now we're looking at Angular animations and accessibility. So animations can arm users. Animations can arm users, and here's how to to do them responsively. Okay. Some users have disorders. Motion animation can cause dizziness, nausea, seizures, and the operating system has a setting for this, and it calls prefers reduced motion, right? So when it comes to your CSS, always respect the media query. A lot of media queries, people fail to use them again, and just and that's the hope. That's the goal of this particular webinar, is to encourage more people to think of these things, as they build, right? So over here we have the prefers reduced motion, right? And here we can also use Angular Signal, the check-in component with Signal. All right, you can use that, and you can also use you can trigger the animations conditionally. Okay, can have that. So one rule of thumb when it comes to the fade opacity, almost always safe. Slide, spin, scale, can cause problems for some users. So you can use your fade or opacity. Let's try to use that, right? Because when it's too bright, it can cause issues for your users, make them dizzy and all of that. So we've talked about sites. Now we are going to the audio feedback, right? So if you think of Area Life as a radio broadcast region, screen readers announce changes if the focus is elsewhere. All right. You can see the attribute Area Life, polite. This one is preferred. Okay. Finish what you're saying, then announce it. All right. Best for form errors, success messages, search results, cart updates. Then we have the Area Life assertive. It's quite urgent, right? It says interrupt everything and say this now, in case you want to, project a very urgent message. So you can use the Area Life, and then you set it to assertive. You can see the implementation pattern here, right here. Okay. Announcement.announce, payment failed, and all of that. So this is assertive, and this is polite. Now we are on to zoneless. Okay, remember from when we coming from? You're coming from hope everyone can still hear me and see me. Okay. Okay. When it comes to zoneless Angular, why performance is an accessibility issue. When we think of Angular updates and these new features coming out with Angular, we think of it in terms of, like I said before, the user experience, the developer experience, right? And we also think of it as making or building, scalable applications and performant application. Okay. So Zone.js is like a loud building alarm. I know we all know what that is. Like a loud building alarm.
So Zonja is like a loud building alarm.
Okay. And so it goes off every time if anyone enters the building. Signals are like a smart doorbell. Only rings when the right person arrives. All right. So when we look at Zone.js or Zoneless Angular, we look at it in terms of stable accessibility tree. The screen readers build a virtual map of the page. Unnecessary re-renders corrupt the map. Signals, keep it stable. All right. And no missed focus calls. The focus management calls in AngularJS, in Zone.js apps, can fire at the wrong time. So, we've used after next render before, so we can combine signals and the next render, and you can run them, after the DOM is ready. So, why is this important? It's important because it's better on low-end devices. As we all know, many users in Africa use low-spec phones, all right? Low JS overhead means less junk, and less junk means you know um, good for accessibility. More means it's bad. It becomes an accessibility problem. Okay, so of course you can enable Zone.js. You just provide experimental Zone.js, zoneless change detection. Works best when all of your reactive states uses Signal. Also, we have the testing accessibility, right? Catch problems early. Testing is good. All right. Testing is good. You don't wait for user complaints. Run automated checks in test suite. So you can use the Just Axe. It's very. Last time I checked that, like 1 million downloads weekly. Is the industry standard for checking engine, and it wraps it for Angular tests. And you can write your tests, something like this on the screen. Can also block regressions. Violations become test failures. No code with ally issues get merged. Team wide standard enhanced automatically. So why is it important? The Axe score itself catches 30 to 40% of issues automatically. And manual keyboard testing and screen reader testing, catch the results. So it's important. In conjunction with your other tests, yeah, your Cypress tested and all of that, you know, you can also, use the just Axe to, catch accessibility issues. So that way you're not being reactive, you're being proactive. Okay, so like I said before, when it comes to building accessibility applications, you're being proactive. Most times what we see people do is patch, 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 and that's you being reactive. You know, oh, you finally discover there's an issue, and then you patch it, you patch it, you patch it. Well, ab initio from the get-go, you should build applications, you know, with accessibility in mind, basically. As we draw close to the end of this seminar, these are some of the accessibility starter checklists that I want everyone to, um, can start with, right? A list of all of the items there. Use real HTML elements. Again, buttons, not div, not span, right? You use a button for things like this. And now the main article, you use a button, and then you label every form input. Most times I see applications, and when I'm reviewing or doing code reviews, I see that most developers just add the labels and they don't link it to the input. All right. So you make sure that you label every form input. Every form input is linked to a label. You can also, link them, yeah. And then signal derived area state. You can use computed for area invalid or area expanded, depending on the error that you want the user to see. Another thing is using area life polite for errors. Signal forms was area life. And another one is focus on open panel, panel open here. And then we're using the act next render for that. And also focus on close. And also at 4, we track. Show that every time you use the at 4 for your loops and everything, your iteration, always track on the ID. Then you respect the, prefers reduced motion, for people with, low vision, blindness, low vision basically. And then the contrast ratio 451 minimum. Use CSS token system, and you check with browser tools. Again, we looked at, using the axe core in tests. Okay, can use that. You download, just axe, it block merges that break accessibility issues, right? So that's cool. Then you can also test with the keyboard only. Tap through your whole application and see if you can do everything. Okay. Some might just have, one hand, one finger, they should be able to tap through your application and see if they're able to do some certain things in your application. And you see this, and you're able to tell if you can do this on your application, only if you're using the semantic HTML, because the semantic HTML works very well with the tab, right? If you notice that the applications you've built, you cannot tap through all of them, it means you're not using the right semantic tags. So you need to go back, use the right semantic tags, and you notice that you're able to tap through and through. Also tests with a screen reader as well. Most blind people or people low vision, use a screen reader. So you can use a screen reader, you can get one for accessibility. I know some of these things they come in like, oh, is it necessary? Oh, is it worth it? Is it worth all the stress and all of that? Again, I said it's a responsibility that every engineer, should bear upon themselves to build accessible apps, because you don't know who needs it at the end of the day, right? You don't know who needs to make a payment urgently and the person has low vision. You don't know who needs to, um, you know, make payments and the person doesn't have, complete set of fingers. And they need to make payments urgently, maybe for someone to make payments so that, they can clear up the medical bills, pay transportation fees, pay school fees, and all of that, all those important stuff. And they are on your application. So it's important. It's a responsibility. The onus is on every engineer to think of this as, part of, the development process. I'm also talking to myself. Sometimes when the application works, oh, it works, it's fine. You move on with our lives. Things like that. So as we wrap up, what are the things to take away from this webinar? Okay. From how do I make this accessible is an afterthought, right? So that's wrong thinking. You built the application. Now you're thinking, oh, the application is done. Yeah. So how do I make it accessible? No, that's the wrong way of looking at it. You go to, how do I build this so accessibility is natural by design? So by design, from the outset, from the inception, you are building an application with accessibility in mind. It's cool, right? And before you build, you have a checklist, right? So you're thinking HTML first, use the right element. ARIA is like last resort, basically. If you have to conquer the problem of not using the right elements, ARIA is like a very last resort, like patching, sort of. But you build with using the right using the right semantic tags, the right element, right? Each element has a purpose from which the content is being enclosed. There's a purpose for that particular element. The purpose of a button is, button to be clicked on. Article, main, aside, figure for images, H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. These are, semantic tags that clearly define what they mean. Right. And so use signals. Like I said, if you are not using the latest Angular features, you're depriving rather your users of that experience, of that new cool Angular experience. So you need to use the latest Angular features. Okay. Signal forms, right? Also use signal forms. Animations, when we talked about animation, we said that you should always respect, you know, um, always respect, prefers reduce function, sorry, motion rather, for your animations. And then we talked about the act call, all right? Use it for your testing purposes, to catch regressions before you use it too. Okay. 1 billion people globally live with disabilities. So you build for them. They also need to experience the genius of your application. Don't deprive them of that. They also need to interact. They also need to, do some certain things, basic cool things that people do without disabilities. They also want to experience that. So don't deprive them of such experience. Okay, I'll take questions now. Okay, see a question here. It says, beyond area labels, what is the most common accessibility pitfall you see in modern SPAs, page applications, that these new Angular features, specifically help solve? I would say for me, the modern pitfalls would be when it comes to spas is lack of semantic templating. You'll be surprised how that is much of a big deal when it comes to writing just the template itself. Many people use tags that are irrelevant for probably something that they want to achieve. You just use the wrong tags for the right reasons. And so once you're able to cross that hurdle of using the right HTML templates, right, the right tags, the right semantic tags, you've solved at least 80% of your accessibility issues. It's crazy, right? Yes. So it just solves it. And when that comes to using Angular, right, not using the new APIs or new features that the Angular team has done upgraded is also accessibility issues, right? I don't think there's no reason why you know you're still using engine 4 or ngif. Why? There's no reason for you to, right? So that itself is an accessibility problem. Your Angular application is backdated. It's a major. So you need to upgrade to the latest features so that, like I said before, for developer experience, and so that your user can also enjoy the experience, that the Angular team, has, probably worked on. The goal of Angular as a framework is to build application with confidence. And every feature, every release aims to get to that point. That is the goal. Build application with confidence, right? Every feature, every new release, is tilting towards that particular goal. So the onus is on the software engineer to do that, right? So basically, I don't know if I answered your question. Any more questions? All right. If there are no more questions, um, thank you very much. So you can reach out. You have questions about accessibility, can reach out to me on Twitter or X, whatever it is called now. And okay, yeah. Wayne says I used to underestimate the typing of elements, in websites until I learned. Yeah, it's crazy, right? You know, back in the day, right? Um, I think my very first experience with this was when I it was like an epiphany for me. The moment I got to realize that instead of using the mouse, I could actually use the tab button to control my applications, or to control my PC. Then we used to have, like, a joke amongst our friends about who can do the most work using just keyboard. And it's crazy, right? Using just the keyboard without touching the mouse, who can do the most work? All right. And it goes to show how important it is, because with a single button, tab, for example, the user should be the tab, maybe the tab and the arrow keys, the up and down, the left and right. A user should be able to navigate your application. If a user can't, then you need to go back and look at the accessibilities involved in your application. Thank you, Wayne, for that. Okay, thank you everyone so much. A big thank you to Wayne for this opportunity. Angular Kenya is doing a lot, and we hope to replicate this in Lagos as well. Hopefully, challenges, we're able to overcome those challenges, but hopefully we'll catch up. We'll catch up with Angular Kenya. Angular Kenya is setting the pace for all Africa. Thank you so much, Wayne, and thank you, Angular Kenya. Thank you to the team. You guys are doing wonderful work. And I hope that this channel continues to grow. And out of this channel, we birth, more Angular developers at the end of the day. So you can reach out, Twitter, Babatunde LMG is my name. LinkedIn is over there. GitHub, follow me on GitHub, please. GitHub, trying to build my GitHub profile. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Tony.
So, there's a question, because ARIA is one of the new features that has been introduced by the Angular team. Is it yet stable enough to be used in the applications we're developing nowadays, or when we're doing code migrations? Yeah, so you can answer that.
I think it's pretty much stable, but as always, you get to run tests before from I'll always say, do like a makeshift of some of these features. Do a makeshift, use them for a while before you eventually, you know, push them to production. But aside that, there's usually the um, notification from the Angular team, stable or not. You know, I believe it's stable, but then again, you do your own checks. Um, Play with it. That's where I used to say it. Play with the apps, play with the APIs, the new features. And if you have any concern, the Angular team is always ready, and also the Angular experts are also always ready to maybe push forward those concerns. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. That was an amazing talk. I'd personally confess I've not interacted with ARIA significantly,
No, don't
but
worry. We are plenty.
from today's session, I've learned a lot. So thank you, Babatunde, for that session. I'm sure our community members have learned a thing or two, and we hope they're going to apply the skills that you have imparted on us today in their own applications. And yes, thank you very much. So for our community members, thank you again for joining. For the new members, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, share. We usually have these bi-weekly webinars. So on Thursdays, every 2 weeks, and yes, so hit the notification bell. We are going to be updating you with more content. For the members of the community who are in Kenya, we are still having our campus tours. So this Saturday we meet at the University of Embu, and it's going to be a nice one. Otherwise, we can have an amazing evening, and thank you guys for joining. Goodbye.